so seriously. I find that really, really interesting. So I also found that interesting. Well, I hope this was a useful way, as opposed to like, giving, having open book and open notes as a way to get into it. If you like it, if we find that we like this, then we'll try to keep it going. I don't know why this shut off. Okay. I don't know why this isn't working. There it is. Now it should work. Oh, I see the problem. Never mind, it's my bad. There we go. Okay. All right. So, what I plan to do is sort of talk about, in general, about a few issues that I think are vital for us to understand in terms of doing feminist literature. I want to say, for reasons that are a little strange, I have almost all of my collection of different theoretical texts in Michigan, like not here, but for some reason I have about 8 or 9 feminist theory books in my office. So if you decide, if you decide you want to work on any particular thing, let me know, and I can loan out these books, or I can get them at the library and put them on reserve. Okay. So if you want to work on, if you decide I want to work on post-colonial theory, I don't even know if we do that, but I think we do later. I've got some books on that. If you want to work on psychoanalysis, I got tons of books on that. So like I can just loan you the books. The most useful ones are probably the ones that collect essays. And that's what I have, a lot of these feminist ones. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, the 3 waves of feminism. Does somebody want to tell me what they kind of were? Feminism's 3 waves. Yeah.
So the first wave was like women should have the right to vote.
Yeah.
Sort of like equal with men.
Yes, exactly, and it corresponds, sort of historically, it corresponds with women trying to get basic rights, property rights. It was very grounded in sort of radical feminism that began kind of at the end of the 18th century, but really didn't take hold until the late Victorian and then the early modern or early modernist period, the kind of like late 19th, early 20th century, when you had suffragettes and people sort of fighting for women's rights and all of these great thinkers. Right? Okay. What about the second wave? What's that?
Like equal rights.
Equal rights, but on a different footing, right?
Yeah, like we're trying to be recognized as
what period? What historical period?
Wasn't this like the 70s?
Yeah, 1960s and 70s. Yeah, absolutely. So it comes out of the same liberation movements as Chicano rights, the civil rights movement. What's that?
Hippies.
Well, hippies sort of, but I mean there was a radical underside to this, because a lot of times we think about hippies as this kind of like, just taking acid and listening to the Grateful Dead and all that, but good. I'm glad. So there's this other kind of more radical side of it, which had to do with this political movement. All right, and then the third wave, I think, is sort of maybe where we are now, which is trying to figure out. In some ways, there's a backlash against that earlier or second wave of feminism, like don't take away my right to be, to be who I want to be. Don't tell me that I can't, like, because in the idea of 1970s feminism in a sort of way was don't be for men, don't be.
Like sisterhood.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's a certain sort of sense in which there have been a number of different movements, including the kind of I don't want to go into. There's a lot of them, and some of them are sort of reclaiming femininity from a feminist perspective, if that makes any sense. Reclaiming feminine sexuality from a sort of like, yeah. Okay. All right, good. So according to Parker, I said that, and this is like I think his first claim, that feminism, literary critical feminism, is not a method but a perspective and interest an aperture or a kind of like a lens from which to see things. I think this seems sort of right, but it's interesting how easily feminist theory accommodates other theories to do the methodological work. And I think it accommodates both, very easily accommodates psychoanalytic and Marxist theory, very easily. Both of those two, because they talk about, on the one hand, formations of ideas in psychoanalysis, the way formations of ideas are grounded in society and culture, and a kind of way of thinking about the self, and then Marxist theory because it's largely about the way in which people are alienated or oppressed, right? So it picks up both of those things. So the larger issues. Somebody tell me the difference between sex and gender. This is something you'll get in a Feminism 101, Zeke.
Gender is more of a social construct as opposed to like the actual sex, I guess.
Sex is more bodily or physiological and has to do with genitalia or whatever, although the kind of imaginary we have about genitalia plays into gender and all of that thing. Yeah, absolutely right. Okay, what about objectivization of women? This is a pretty easy one, but does somebody want to sort of comment on that? Mm-hmm.
Objectivization of women is like men not seeing women as anything but like sexual objects or objects as means to like produce some outcome that's desirable for the men.
Right. So I think that's exactly right. You can also though say that it's possible for like a woman artist to objectify women in a sort of way. And this is really interesting. This weekend I did. I'm part of a group of activists in Newark who created a sort of safe, sober cafe for people newly sober in addiction to come and we had an open mic and we played music and we had food and all this. And somebody who I run a poetry writing workshop with people who are addicts and somebody who works with does painting workshops with them brought a number of her paintings, and she wanted to use this one painting in one of our like flyers. And she's a woman in her I would say probably 40s, late 40s, and she depicted a number of pictures of women that were very kind of sexualized, and for her they symbolized her breaking out of addiction. And my first thought was, and this is so stupid and so kind of like, so my first thought was like, that's disturbing. I mean, that doesn't fit. That's kind of like overly sexualized. Isn't that objectifying and whatever? And she's like, oh no, for me they represent this. And I was like going, oh yeah, see, I'm trying to keep this. I have a too narrow a mindset of this, right? And maybe also too much of a 20th century early second wave feminist idea about what constitutes objectivization. I'm still confused about these issues. When I was marching like in kind of protests in 2000 or early 2017 during the Women's March, there were a lot of people going around yelling "pussy power, pussy power, pussy power," and excuse me, this is the thing, and I'm like, that's cool, but that makes me uncomfortable. And it felt really old, for what I meant, and I felt like, is this the right political signal? But if it's coming from women, it's the right political you know what I mean? It's just like, for me, it was uncomfortable, and so like I just have to like shut the hell up and just, you know what I mean? Like on a certain level, because it's not my thing, So yeah.
I just wanted to ask, do you still work with the I think it was like, I'm not sure if it's girls, but the ones that kind of like had like first degree, second degree, like murders, stuff like that.
Do I still do what?
Because remember when you had the alcoholism class?
Yeah, and we had somebody come in.
Do you still work with that group?
I do, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's no murder involved.
I don't know.
No. There are people that have been convicted of felonies, but non-violent drug-related felonies.
I couldn't think of felonies. I was like, I know it's not murder, but I don't know how someone would word for it.
Well, actually, I don't know if any of them committed murder, but I don't think so.
I was just gonna say, like, with the objectivization, I have a 2-year-old daughter, and so my husband and I were looking girls are like a thing, and I don't know. I guess I'm only 23, but I'm like, what the hell is a visco girl? So we were like looking on like Pinterest of pictures of
Yes.
visco girls, and I was like, oh my god, I can't believe they're like 14, and I'm like, they are wearing such short shorts and like their crop tops, and like they're so sexualized. And I was like, if Oprah would try to leave the house like that, I would be like, you need to change. And my husband was like, well, why? And like, but he doesn't. For me, it's like protection, you know what I mean? But like, why does it have to be like that? And then for him, like, as a man, he wouldn't understand why, like, why I would feel like that she should be protected.
Right. These are very complicated issues for sure. Yeah. No. No. I mean, I have a 20-year-old daughter. Yeah. I mean, it's like. All right. Intersectionality. This is a really important term, and it comes up in Parker, but nowhere else. But it's important for us to know this. Does somebody want to talk about intersectionality? Who's heard of the term before? Do you know what it is? Anybody know what it is?
It's like we talked about it in Dr. Dar's class.
We did,
It
but I
was
don't
like
remember.
Kimberly, I can't remember your lesson. When like two social factors. Like,
Oh yeah. It's actually three, more or less. I usually talk about three. Right. So intersectionality is when race, gender, and class are all kind of the way in which they're all sort of interwoven into identity, and it's very difficult to tease them apart, and we have to kind of treat them all as important. Right. That's the claim. I have a lot to say about intersectionality, but I'm not going to say it right now. I definitely think it's a powerful and important tool for us to think about, but I'm not going to give you. It doesn't matter what I think about it right now. I think it's very important, but that's the basic understanding. So you can see already the ways in which just talking about feminism makes us take a step back and say, we have to talk about these other cultural theories, these other ideas that so far we haven't had to deal with, right? A backdrop to this stuff. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about Mulvey's essay. Why don't we go ahead and look at turn to the first pages of it, because she begins by making a claim about a political use of psychoanalysis. All right. So it's page 232. All right. This paper intends to use psychoanalysis to discover where and how the fascination of film is reinforced by pre-existing patterns of fascination already at work within the individual subject and the social formations that have molded him. It takes as its starting point the way film reflects, reveals, and even plays on the straight, socially established interpretation of sexual difference, which controls images, erotic ways of looking, and spectacle. It is helpful to understand what the cinema has been, how its magic has worked in the past, while attempting a theory and a practice which will challenge the cinema of the past. Psychoanalytic theory is thus appropriated here as a political weapon, demonstrating the way the unconscious of patriarchal society has structured film form. Okay, so the first thing that I think is, for me, is really interesting is this term fascination, which literally means to be kind of almost hypnotized or fascinated, to be attached in a certain sort of way. The way in which you almost have no choice but to be kind of engaged in a way with this thing. And the idea is that she's making a clear case that while film appears as this kind of entertainment thing that's separate in a certain sort of way from your daily life, that fascination with in terms of she's just focusing on the images of women in film here. That fascination is directly connected then to this fascination which is already inside you and already structured your way of seeing the world. So it wouldn't work. I'm thinking of, I don't know, what would be an example of this kind of, it's really weird. Is the movie called Deus Ex Machina? Has anybody seen it?
Deus Ex.
What?
I think it's just Deus Ex, maybe.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
With the where the guy creates a woman like robot or yeah.
Super smart AI.
I think that's playing with this idea of the fascination that's already inside the guy who comes to interview the other guy and gets involved in the whole thing, and so the way his relationship to a kind of idea of a woman, it structures the way he relates, and the film is sort of, I think, comments on that in a way. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but yeah. All right. Yeah, it's not called Deus Ex Machina. I don't know what it's called. Anyway, okay. All right. So let me ask you a question here. What do you think about this argument that Mulvey uses? This kind of way of recapturing basic Freudian theory and trying to use it in a way to interpret film. And by the way, if you guys have films that you would like to recommend for us to think about, to watch and to use as part of our critique, you should let me know. You should.
Mad Max is Fury Road is a very good feminist movie.
It is a very interesting feminist movie.
There's one, I don't know if it's The Mother or just Mother. I forget what it's called. I think it's Mother, but that one's I don't know if it's a feminist movie per se, but it definitely delves into it, cause it's like.
What happens? I feel like I've seen it, but I can't remember.
It's like I can't really say too much about giving away a bunch of it, but it's like it starts off with just this house in the middle of nowhere with this woman who's pregnant with this man's child, obviously, and then like these weird people come into their lives constantly, and they keep destroying these things that this woman has like worked for, and she keeps telling the man, like, please stop, I've done so much for this, I've worked so hard for this, why are you destroying everything that we love and what is beautiful?
Right.
And constantly he just keeps ignoring her, like, these are people that we need to help, they're, this and this.
Okay.
But it's such a hard movie to explain that it's one of those you just have to watch to like get it.
Why don't you guys start assembling a list of things that you think, not just for feminists, but anything that you think would be useful to apply theory to, your favorite movies that you think would be useful to apply theory to, and I'll try to put together a list of films you could use for final projects, but also for even your essays. The thing is, I would like this list to be smallish. Like, I would like it to be no more than 5-6 films. I would like them to be relatively recent films, and hopefully they will be films we can get that can be on the DRM, so on the library server, or on Canopy.
Does it have to be films per se? Can it be TV series, like limited TV series, not super long?
That depends on the group. I'm completely fine. I'm willing to watch a limited thing, because I want us all to have seen these, right? So they become a kind of canon for us, a kind of archive. Like we all know these ones, and we can all refer to them rather easily. Okay. So anyway, I'm interested in what you think about the basic use of this. So it looks a little something like in Freud. It's really even hard to talk about. All right, so let's talk about castration for a second. So there are two theories of castration. One is Freud's, and the other is Lacan's. And I'm not a Lacanian, but this is one of the times when I'm going to tell you that I really prefer Lacan's theory of castration, which is that castration is something everybody goes through in different ways. It's basically the understanding that you have a lack, that there's something you will never be able to fill on some level, and and that constitutes who you are as a subject. To me, that's very powerful. That seems very true, right? We have a, I know that like to speak biographically for a second, autobiographically for a second, like it's not a surprise. I've openly said this to people. I'm in recovery as an addict and alcoholic. I know that I use drugs and alcohol in order to not deal with that lack, to try to cover over the fact that there was something that in my life I couldn't find, whatever. And Lacan's, some people would say, well, you can fill that up with something else, like something like God or something like that, which is possible. But I mean, for Lacan, it was like you just have to live with it. Freud's is very different. It also structures our subjectivity, but it structures women's subjectivity different than it structures men's subjectivity. It structures men's subjectivity because they have a fear of castration. It structures women's subjectivity because at a certain basic level, they are without the phallus, they are without this thing. So it's sort of, it strangely sets up a kind of in an unequal kind of situation. And this is what has been the problem with classical psychoanalytic theory for feminists and other people, although not for these French feminists that we're about to deal with, like Luce or Vigorai. So the idea is that, and this leads to then this idea with women of penis envy. I should say something in Freud's defense here. Freud says over and over again in his texts that what he's talking about is not a literal thing. So it's very easy to understand late Victorian culture as women understanding that they don't have something men have, this kind of power, and little girls understanding that, and Freud calling that penis envy. Do you see what I'm saying? It doesn't have to be literally they want to have a penis. They simply lack the power that men have in the society. So Freud says over and over again, I'm not talking literally here, but he wants to use literal terms because he wants to concretize it in early childhood and in our bodies. So now I'm back to defending Freud. There's something else I was going to say. All right, so tell me about what you think about her argument here, which is that the reason women, in a movie, the reason that the woman, the femme fatale in a movie, is so attractive to us, to men, is that she represents this unknowable other, this lack, and then it comes back to our own fear of castration.
I feel like just like when she did it and when Freud did it, I feel like using the terms of like sexual nature, like like the phallus or castration, an Oedipal complex. I feel like I agree with you in that they're always supposed to be symbolic for like the social placement of each of these groups.
Yes.
But at the same time, I feel like it makes it kind of unconstructive to talk about it instead of just directly talking about what these psychosexual themes are kind of like implying. So like in this work, I really like how she like deconstructed how like films are created to appeal to the male gaze, and that was what I considered to be like the primary.
Right. Scopophilia, yeah.
Yeah. I really liked that, but
love of looking.
But the representation of it as castration anxiety, I feel like did more to distract from the point of scopophilia than I feel like it added to it.
I see what you're saying. So I completely think that's a valid criticism. So by universalizing this idea, what Freud and Mulvey sort of do is they almost make it sound as though we don't have any way out of it, or we can't talk about it in any ways that aren't already grounded in something literal. Yeah, I get that. That makes sense to me.
And it also feels a little bit like euphemistic, which is kind of funny because they're using like sexual objects to represent it. But it's like euphemistic to actually like get into the more for Freud than her, because obviously like she's a feminist. But I feel like it was kind of euphemistic for Freud to not have to deal with feminist and women's issues whenever he was talking about like cognitive development. Like using like easier or like more kind words, I guess, to say something that they don't actually have to have.
Freud. I mean, it's interesting to think about. Freud on the one hand, cared about women's issues more than any thinker up until his point, in a certain sense, because he was interested in the in particularly freeing women from this constraint. But he uses language which is outside of the culture. What Parker says here. What does Parker mean when he says that when he talks about essentialism?
It's very basic and.
It's not about how basic it is. Katie, do you remember?
I just remember him mentioning it in like the structuralism.
He did. He mentioned it there. Alex, do you remember essentialism? You don't hear it very much in critical theory, but when I was in grad school, everybody was like going, "You're an essentialist," you know. To be an essentialist means that you ground your ideas in something that is physically and materially part of the world. So rather than saying, you know, so Freud is essentialist insofar as he grounds our later subjectivity on our physical bodies, and right. He's not essentialist insofar as he thinks that those are culturally constructed. Okay, that our ideas about our bodies are culturally constructed. So, let me. Anybody else about whether they found this, how convincing they found this argument? Let me say something else about the argument that I kind of forgot to say. I think that one of the things she does throughout this essay, which is very powerful, is to talk about the tension that is set up between two different you notice her sort of way of writing is she'd give you three sections, section A and section B, and then she'd say in section C. Now, the thing that is happening here is that these two things are in tension with one another. So she gives you scopophilia. And does anybody remember what the thing that she poses scopophilia to? It's identification.
Yeah, maybe.
Right. So, and that's where she talks about the mirror stage. So I'm really glad I gave you guys that essay because it came up right away in the next essay that we looked at. So love of seeing keeps you kind of separated from the object, but the need for identification puts you in the place of having to be close to the object. The way that the film solves it is that scopophilia, okay, so this is the woman, this is the man in film. And what happens is that the man in this has the scopophilic relation, which is looks at the woman and takes pleasure in her. But then there's a third figure here, which is the masculine hero and so we'll just call him this is film woman, and this is film man, and this is viewer man. Okay, so film man becomes the subject of identification for this guy. So he not only possesses the woman because he's fascinated through the gaze, right? And he's able to get rid of his worry about castration and the kind of unknowability of him because he forms an identification with the film man, who then either sleeps with her or arrests her or kills her. Sometimes all three, right? I mean, I'm thinking of a great Humphrey Bogart movie, and I think it's Maltese Falcon, where after he flirts with this woman for a long time, at the very end of the movie, he arrests her because she's guilty, right? You know, or he sends her off to the cops, and he's like, love, whatever, you know. So you form this identification, but it's this tension, I think, that plays the part. The tension, I wrote this in my notes, the tension drives the artwork and her reading of the artwork. So she needs the tension in order to talk about it, but the tension comes at a cost. So that cost is that women must continue to be swallowed. Let me talk about this in terms of theory for a second. In the scopophilic way, the woman needs to be there's a tension between internal and external. I can't remember the page number where she talks about this, but it's a kind of process of internalizing the image and externalizing the image. So it's a process of swallowing the woman and spitting her out, swallowing the woman and spitting her out. All right? In psychoanalytic terms, this is called projection and introjection. It's externalizing and internalizing the image. And this constant process allows us to say that, no, we love women. That's why we want to keep them safe. Right? We love women. That's why women are special in this way, right? So you find the same thing, this externalizing and internalizing, going back and forth. Like as Americans, let me talk about it this way for a second. As Americans, our greatest sort of like claim to being a great nation is that we're so welcoming. That we're built on all these different immigrant classes and all these different immigrant things. So we internalize that idea. But then we say, oh no, we have to be safe and we have to keep the others out. And that there are these people coming in to hurt us. So we have this constant process of what makes us America is that we take in everybody. What keeps us American is we don't let everybody in. Do you see what I mean? So it's a constant process of internalizing and externalizing. Please don't text while we're okay. Thanks. So this is again internalizing is introjection. You take the image in. Externalizing is you put the image out. So finally, I'm going to try to finish this up with Mulvey for a second. What Mulvey ultimately says is that women are, let's go ahead and look at the final section. I think she calls it a summary. Yes. So I'm on page 241. To begin with, as an ending, the voyeuristic scopophilic look that is a crucial part of traditional filmic pleasure can itself be broken down. There are three different looks associated with the cinema. That of the camera that records the pro-filmic event, that of the audience as it watches, and that is the characters look at each other within the screen illusion. The conventions of narrative film deny the first two and subordinate them to the third, the conscious aim of always being always to eliminate intrusive camera presence and to prevent a distancing awareness in the audience. So what she's saying is, like, when you look at film, this is a very, very complex and I think important thing for us. When you look at film, what film wants you to say is it's only a movie. It's just a story between these two people. Have you ever had anybody say that to you? Like you're talking about a book or a song that you love, and you're like going, "No, dude, it's like about this and it's about that," and they go, "It's just a song, right? Yeah, it's just a movie. It's just a book. It's just a poem. It's supposed to reduce it to the story that happens between these two. What gets cut out is that first part. When the camera captures what's happening, that is not only a social event, it's a political event, a cultural event, everything. Who got the money to make this film? You know, are you able to make you remember there's a great quote in Parker that says, I don't remember who says it, but like the test of, I think it's Bechtel or something like that, the Bechtel test, about whether or not a film is really a feminist film. Are there two women characters that you can remember and point to? And do they have an actual conversation in the movie that doesn't concern a man? And if that's the case, then you have a feminist film. I was thinking that means that with that Turn of the Screw, maybe a feminist text, right? Because there are lots of conversations between Mrs. Gross and the governess that don't really seem to concern a man per se. I think there's a man in the background. Okay. Anyway, my place. Oh, I really lost my place. Does anybody remember what I was saying?
The part of the camera?
Oh, the camera, yeah, thank you so much. So the camera is the first part that gets cut out. We don't talk about how films are made. That you have to show them to trial audiences who decide whether or not they like it or that it's too long, right? That you have to raise all this money to make them, all this sort of. We don't talk about that aspect, which is itself political and involves very much a kind of feminist kind of critique. If you think about, well, not just feminist, because I mean, look how many I mean, I remember it doesn't matter. How many black people are in films? How many, whatever it is, those kinds of things also are. So you cut that part out, but also importantly, you cut out the interpretation of the viewer's gaze, and how that is social and political and cultural and aesthetic, and what frames that, and you just focus on the story. She wants to open all of that up. Open all of that up for discussion. Right? So she wants to do for film what literary critics have been doing for a little while, which is to think about the way in which the reader's role becomes important, the viewer's role becomes important in film. I think let me see if there's anything else. I think I can do the final part on, let me see if I left anything out. No, I think that's it. Those are the main points I had. Let me talk really quickly. Turn to the Lusa Rigorei. This one's much easier because although I think it's a great essay, and I picked it because I read it in grad school. I read the whole book in grad school, and because I thought it connected well with this one, right? I thought they both use psychoanalysis in ways. These are just some points I'm going to point out, and then I'll just make sure we all understand what her argument is. So she engages philosophy in ways that most of the French psychoanalytic criticism from the 1970s and 80s did this, right? So you have Hélène Cescu in your book. I don't think you have Julia Kristeva in your book, but she's another one. They're all feminist critics from the 1970s who use psychoanalytic theory, but they also engage in philosophy. So one of Kristeva's most important arguments is built on an image from Plato, right? So they all use philosophy. Her argument that sex and gender is political, I think is not surprising to us. And she really grounds sexual difference in bodies in ways that make some people uncomfortable but don't make French theorists uncomfortable. They're completely fine grounding it in that way. Lacan has whole seminars, like whole year-long discussions about what he calls sexual difference. And ultimately he says there is no sexual difference. By that he does not mean that there's no difference between men and women. He means something else that's a little more complicated than that, but we won't go into it. But anyway, she bases it in Lacan. And then I thought that her argument about women touching rather than looking is deconstructed. You see how she turns what has been philosophically the main so logos, the idea of logos or reason must always be, from the Greeks onward, must always be verified by looking. Seeing is believing, right? You always have to verify logos by getting first-hand experience, right? British empiricists took this even farther and made it the primary way of knowing, the only way of knowing, right? So here she's deconstructed in that she's turning that upside down and saying women are about touching. Women are also not limited to one kind of sexual experience. Everything about women is sexual, right? It's all sexualized. It's all eroticized. Here the trope is Freud's theory of the infant. So Freud writes that the infant is polymorphously perverse, and but what he means by this is that every part of the infant's body is alive to touching and alive to feeling, because the infant has not yet been told that certain parts of his or her body are not okay. So it's all okay. You know, genitals are okay, anuses are okay, but genital aren't more important than, say, fingers. Shoulders are just as important as eyes. You know what I mean? It's like all kind of like that's his idea of the infant. It's polymorphously perverse, and I think Barriga is taking that and saying women are in that position. And then the thing that she's taken the most heat for is this idea. I think it's really interesting. Women are neither one nor two. Right? They're women are neither women are plural, multiple, infinite. Right? The last thing is that women somehow, for Rai, are outside of conventional ideas of reason. Largely, I suppose, because they have been shut out. They're whatever has been shut out. And then she ends the essay by saying, well, then does that mean that we should just reject men altogether and reject that and go off and form our own society? And then when we're as strong as possible, then we conquer men or whatever. And she's like, well, no. It's almost like she wants to think about what it would be like to embrace the difference that is woman, politicize that difference, and to work at rectifying wrongs in the society, but not to become men. Not to play the power game, not to become a one or a two, but to remain infinite and somehow. All right, so let's just take 5 minutes to do that. Well, shoot. You know what I'll do? I'll have you take this home if you don't mind, and just fill it out and bring it next time. It's not very much writing. I just didn't give us enough time for it. I'm sorry. Are there any questions about this stuff, or any things that are not clear? Okay, if you can just bring these back, that would be really great. You can do it even if you did it today. I'd be even happier when the sort of ideas that we've talked about are still in your mind. I would like to sort of see what kind of breaks through. So for Thursday, I'm gonna bring a poem, a longish poem by Adrienne Rich, called "Diving into the Wreck," and it should almost lend itself perfectly to feminist criticism, and we'll work from there. But what I also want from you are your commonplace books. Bring them in so I can kind of look at what you've been writing, and then I want pretty soon. I want you to be thinking about about what you might want to be doing for a final project. I know we still have a midterm and a final and all that, but I would like us to think about what you want to do for your final project. Okay? Any questions? So if, per chance, you didn't get a chance to fully read both essays, you should fully read both essays by Thursday too. Okay? And we'll have a session talking about diving into the wreck, and I'll look at your commonplace books. All right, thanks everybody.